Right, so if you had to sum up the defining characteristics of Israeli attacks on another group, with all we've witnessed in large part since October 7th, not because that is when Israeli atrocity began against Palestinians, of course, but when the eyes of so many around the world were finally open to the propaganda Western media and Israeli Hasbara has been feeding us with for so long, there's a few things that might stick out for you there. Civilian targets, women and children for the most part, since half of Gaza is literally under the age of 18. More journalists have been killed in Gaza in 20 months than in any conflict of the 20th century, including both world wars. Israel has systematically destroyed healthcare across Gaza, deliberately claiming hospitals had Hamas tunnels beneath them allegedly, or weapons caches being stored there. Israel has all manner of excuses to justify the unjustifiable in Gaza, doesn't it? So given this video is actually about the latest Israeli strikes on Iran, why am I talking about what has defined arguably the genocide of Gaza then? Well, it's because in the last 24 hours, Israel has deliberately targeted women and children in Iran. Israel has struck a hospital in Iran. Israel has struck a TV station in Iran. What part of that is about taking out nuclear facilities or military targets? It's never been about the nukes, just like Gaza has never been about those hostages. Israel lie, and they lie, and they lie. And we're supposed to keep supporting them according to our bought and paid for Western leaders. Well, no, it's not going to happen. Is it? Right, so apart from everything I just mentioned there in my intro, Israel's latest attacks on Iran are neither about self-defense nor regional stability. It's all about power preservation, specifically Benjamin Netanyahu's. These strikes are not only pushing Iran closer to abandoning international treaties like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, a bill being worked up to do just that right now, driven by Israel and Trump's idiocy as a negotiator and his more stick, less carrot approach to getting his own way and failing abysmally. But they are also dragging the global economy through another oil price roller coaster too, while the West's media machine subtly rallies for regime change, once again reducing Iranian lives to little more than commodities for Western oil interests, because that is how sick some are. Oh look, let's change the Iranian regime. Look at all that oil we can get. Let's do to them what we did to Syria. Yeah, and look at the mess and the ethnic minority persecution that came off the back of installing a former Al-Qaeda terror operative as de facto president there, eh? Israel's recent aggression against Iran, the failure of the diplomatic nonsense from the US, the deliberate targeting of civilians and journalists, and the global reverberations, particularly in the energy markets. This is the price of geopolitical gamesmanship when it comes to the real motivations behind attacks on Iran and the growing threat it is driving as Israeli war crimes multiply unchecked and their motivations for war get exposed as a sham. Because if there is a theme to the last 24 hours, it is destroying any notion that this is about nukes. Let's start with Israel's bombing of the Iranian state television headquarters, shall we? Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, or the IRIB, during a live broadcast. Israel striking journalists again, as we've seen them do without hesitation for so long in Gaza. The attack injured several and killed at least one person, as this excerpt from Press TV explains. Mazameh Azimi succumbed to severe injuries caused by the shockwave from the attack. Azimi was among many staff members present inside the building when it came under attack. The facility, which houses the IRIB's News and Political Affairs Department, was hit by at least 4 projectiles on Monday during a live news broadcast. The transmission was briefly interrupted before Hassan Abedini, IRIB's news director and deputy for political affairs, appeared on air to denounce the diabolic terrorist crime. At the moment of the strike, news anchor Sahar Amami was on air. Despite the building trembling from the first impact, she maintained her composure and continued the broadcast. Allahu Akbar, God is great, she declared, her defiant words echoing globally and drawing widespread attention to the Zionist regime's war crime against Iran's national media. Several journalists present in the building at the time also sustained injuries. The Iranian journalist Sahar Amami was live on air when the missiles struck, clips of the attack having gone viral across social media, astonishingly returned to the broadcast even as the building was still on fire. Amongst the guests present waiting to be interviewed on that day was allegedly the bane of Western journalists, Professor Mohammed Marandi, who survived the strike as well. The bombing of IRIB is a direct violation of Article 79 of the Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, which guarantees protection to journalists in war zones. You simply don't target people wearing press jackets, unless it seems you are Israel. Israel's habitual targeting of media outlets and journalists, seen extensively in Gaza and now in Tehran, shows this to be a deliberate tactic to silence dissent and control the narrative. Israel's assassination doctrine, initially applied to Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon, has now expanded to include Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, now as well. Not that it really worked in Lebanon, of course. Hezbollah only doubled down, didn't they? They've only gone quiet since the election of their new president, Joseph Aoun, who, for my money, has been a massive disappointment thus far, still allowing Israel to run roughshod in the south of his country. Netanyahu, insane as he is, has claimed that assassinating Khamenei would end the war, but it would do the exact opposite. It's a stunning detachment from reality because Iran is a theocracy. Its leadership is systemic and religiously institutional, not reliant on a single individual, but following a faith doctrine. And you can critique that by all means for one reason or another. There are plenty of justifiable reasons to. But should Khamenei be assassinated, it would not pacify the nation. It would likely unleash an all-out retaliatory campaign against Israel, almost certainly leading to the destruction of one nation or the other. But that's what Netanyahu's betting on, isn't it? This fantasy of control is not new for Netanyahu. He claimed recently to have full control of Iranian airspace despite evidence to the contrary. Iranian missiles have continued to strike deep into Israeli territory, disproving his assertion and reinforcing the perception that these states are more about maintaining a grip on domestic power and controlling those aforementioned narratives than military reality. Setting aside the threat to Israel that Netanyahu has made Iran into, the economic cost of the war for Israel is equally so. Reports estimate that Israel is spending approximately $300 million a day on its campaign against Iran, so it is blowing through the $1 billion mark today, therefore. But with Israel's economy having been tanking for months and months already, though, it seems a fair question to ask, therefore, who is footing the bill? Well, of course, we got a good idea about who's footing the bill, don't we? The answer appears to be the United States, or rather the people of the United States via the public purse, both directly through military financial aid and directly through its media apparatus as well, carrying on the propaganda, which is increasingly floating that narrative of Iranian regime change. That this narrative is gaining traction amongst certain US outlets at a time when oil prices briefly spiked by 13% as a result of the conflict before stabilising, ended up showing a particularly twisted mindset in the US over such things, talking up regime change to the benefit of oil companies, exposing the depraved mindset governing foreign policy in Washington by those supporting it.
I mean, for the big oil names, Exxon, Chevron, and so forth, their stocks are hardly moving.
And I understand that. This is not a good thing for them. You know, we've seen wars in the Arabian Gulf lead to oil price spikes, but what comes after that? Recessions, demand downturns, and price drops. This is not a good thing if you're an oil company or an oil producer.
Yeah.
Now, what would be interesting is if there is regime change in Iran and you could get private companies operating in that country with the world's third largest oil reserves, gas reserves, third largest oil reserves. So there's a lot of oil there, and if Iran were to have regime change, peace and stability would be strengthened. So it's but for the oil companies, though, these momentary spikes are dangerous.
Really interesting.
I think it's the same thing for OPEC countries as well.
Having listened to Bob McNally for a couple of minutes here, you're not terribly worried yet.
Lives are weighed against barrels, and in that ledger, Iranian civilians, in the name of regime change, are evidently expendable. This is perhaps the most damning indictment of Western priorities. As Iranian civilians flee Israeli strikes and hospitals are bombed, corporate interests in the West discuss new energy contracts and stabilization for investors. It's a grotesque moral calculus, human life traded for oil futures. But until now, Iran had remained within the boundaries of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and despite rhetoric to the contrary, had not developed nuclear weapons at all, as proven by 30-odd years of Iran being months away or weeks away from a nuclear weapon, according to Israel, and it never having materialized. However, Israel's unprovoked aggression may have pushed Tehran too far now, as the Iranian parliament is now advancing a bill to leave the NPT entirely, meaning they no longer agree in international law to not build these weapons. Whether they will also depends on the lifting of a fatwa prohibiting that research. As I said, Iran is a theocracy. This religious edict matches to Iran as much as international law does. So watch for news on a shift on that as well. But this shift is the ultimate failure of both Israel's assassination doctrine and Donald Trump's failed carrot and stick approach to diplomacy. Instead of engaging Iran constructively, the Trump administration imposed crippling sanctions while dangling superficial negotiations. Israel's latest attack was the final straw that forced Iran away from the table, with the big orange bloater that passes for president thinking this would drive Iran to the negotiating table. They were already at the table, and now they've left it. You're an idiot. In trying to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons, Israel and Trump may have now ensured that it does. In what has become trademark warfare for Israel, though, as seen in Gaza, Israeli strikes are targeting more and more civilian infrastructure in Iran. Because sure, that's going to stop nuclear development, isn't it? Most recently, the Farabi hospital in Kermanshah was bombed, resulting in the deaths of 45 women and children and injuries to 75 others. Perhaps Netanyahu had heard about recent advances Iran had made in nuclear medicine as part of their nuclear research program to fight cancer, and that such genocidal threats as that must be stopped. Israel has long been targeting civilians in Gaza, but now these tactics are showing up in Iran too, showing it not to be the exception, but the rule when it comes to the world's most moral army. The Iranian Foreign Ministry has responded by labelling Israel a nation accustomed to killing children, which is a damning indictment and an accurate one, and a searing condemnation that reflects the pain and rage being felt across Iran both by what has been done in Gaza and is now being meted out on them. These attacks are not isolated mistakes, it is deliberate, it is intentional. They are strategic choices meant to terrorise and demoralise populations. And in a region when the West talks much of terrorism and where many groups are sanctioned as such in various Western nations, arguably the biggest terror outfit of the lot instead enjoys their unequivocal support. As Iran retaliates and Israeli cities come under fire, though, the Netanyahu government has blocked most of its own citizens from leaving the country. Something I covered yesterday, cancelling flights and closing roads. Well, there's been some developments there too. News I'm sure Israel would hate to get out, because those who can afford it are fleeing by boat to Cyprus right now. Some paying up to 6,000 shekels for a seat in a small boat. Yeah, small boat crossings to Cyprus from Israel. Wonder if any of them will try and claim asylum while they're at it. Can you imagine if any of these people were turning up on British shores, Zionists in small boats? Would Keir Starmer kick off and complain about that as a Zionist without equivocation? Of course, it would never happen, would it really? Starmer would happily open a legal, safe route for Israel. It's just the brown-skinned migrants that are a problem in the small boats, isn't it? Anyway, people taking drastic action to save themselves exposes the fragility of Netanyahu's grip on power. He needs this war not for Israel's security, certainly not in the interest of his now captive population. All of a sudden, every Israeli knows what it's like to live in Gaza and not be able to leave. But it's all for his own political survival, isn't it? The longer the conflict continues, the longer he remains in post. Perpetual war is what he needs, especially having just dodged the collapse of his coalition and a vote that can't now be called again for another 6 months. Yet the economic and human toll is mounting, and Netanyahu appears increasingly willing to drag the US further into this quagmire to stay militarily and financially afloat. Netanyahu's vision of a forever war serves a personal purpose. Every new escalation shores up his base and stifles political dissent. His claims such as Tel Aviv today, New York tomorrow, as far as Iranian attacks go, are not grounded in reality, as Iran lacks the capability to strike the US cities or get anywhere close to that. But fear is a powerful political tool, and Netanyahu has traded on fear for decades, and certainly mainstream media are carrying his words. This rhetoric not only inflames tensions but also pressures the US to further involve itself in a war that is just not justified. Should the US formally enter the conflict, not yet official at all, but appears to be moving in that direction, the financial and human costs will be catastrophic. Yet Netanyahu banks on American loyalty, knowing that without it his war machine grinds to a halt. The current trajectory where media are bombed, children are killed, journalists silenced, civilians targeted, simply not sustainable, especially not at the costs involved. Yet the international response remains one of silence, and that is, of course, complicity. The normalisation of war crimes through diplomatic loyalties and media manipulation threatens the very fabric of international law, and that endangers us all. Governments, civil society, individuals alike, we all have a part to play here. We all need to demand accountability. That begins with pressuring Israel to cease its attacks, insisting on international investigations into war crimes and halting military aid that facilitates these atrocities, and that comes by pressuring our own representatives. Israel's war in Iran is not a defensive campaign, but an offensive strategy to protect a failing political leader, and it can't be said often enough. It is a war underwritten by US military aid, sanitized by Western media, and paid for in the lives of innocent Iranians right now. As Iran edges closer to possibly choosing nuclear armament as a result of all the events leading up to this and the here and now, and as oil markets stabilize at the cost of global morality, the need for greater critical discourse has never been greater. Netanyahu's doctrine of assassination, Trump's failed diplomacy, and the collective silence of far too many around the world have paved the way for this disaster. And if we don't start to reverse course, the cost of action, or inaction, becomes catastrophic. Not only is Netanyahu personally out of control, but despite all of his rhetoric about Israel winning against Iran, he's actually losing control. Not least because of the systemic and calculated targeting of military and essential infrastructure targets made by Iran to great effect. Get all the details of that story as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.